It was a cold, silent night in late autumn, the kind where the wind whispers through the trees like a half-forgotten lullaby. Emma sat alone in her small, secluded cabin, surrounded by the endless expanse of forest. The flickering light from a single oil lamp cast long, jagged shadows on the wooden walls, their shapes dancing like specters. Outside, the world was wrapped in a suffocating darkness, a heavy veil that no moonlight could penetrate. She adjusted her blanket, trying to focus on the book in her lap, but the uneasy silence pressed against her ears. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed louder than usual, each second dragging on with excruciating slowness. Thud. Emma froze. The sound came from outside, near the window. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A deliberate noise amidst the oppressive quiet. Her pulse quickened. She turned her head slowly, her eyes darting toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but she could see the faint outline of the glass, reflecting the dim glow of her lamp. Probably just the wind, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling more than she cared to admit. Thud. This time it was louder, closer. Her breath hitched. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like something or someone was testing the outside of the cabin. Heart pounding, Emma rose from her chair, clutching the blanket around her like it was a shield. She tiptoed toward the window, each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet sending a shiver down her spine. As she reached the window, she hesitated. A primal fear gripped her, warning her not to look. But curiosity, that cruel master, won out. She pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Just the dense blackness of the forest staring back at her. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. She let out a shaky breath, a mix of relief and lingering unease. Then she saw it. A shadow. A tall, spindly silhouette standing motionless at the edge of the trees, barely distinguishable from the darkness around it. It was too far to make out any details, but it was there, unmistakably human-shaped. Emma's heart thundered in her chest. She stepped back, letting the curtain fall. The blanket slipped from her shoulders as her hands trembled. She grabbed her phone from the table and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal, of course. A soft tap-tap-tap echoed from the window. She spun around, her stomach lurching. The shadow was closer now, pressed against the glass. It was no longer vague or featureless. Its face, if you could call it that, was a pale, distorted mask, its eyes hollow voids that seemed to suck in the light. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. Emma stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug. She grabbed the fireplace poker, her only weapon, and held it in front of her like a sword. The tapping stopped. The shadow was gone. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner, every shadow, every crack in the walls. She heard the faintest sound, a creak from the hallway behind her. Slowly, she turned, every nerve in her body screaming. Nothing. Then the lamp flickered. The room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat before the light returned. When it did, the shadow was inside. It stood in the center of the room, unnaturally still, its head cocked at an impossible angle. Emma couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her body was frozen in terror as the thing took a single step toward her. The lamp flickered again, and the shadow was gone. Emma gasped for breath, her body trembling violently. She backed against the wall, her fingers gripping the poker so tightly they ached. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Slowly, she turned her head. The mirror above the fireplace reflected the room, but something was wrong. In the reflection, the shadow stood right behind her. Emma spun around, swinging the poker wildly, but there was nothing there. Her own ragged breathing filled the room, each exhale a cloud of panic. Suddenly, the clock chimed midnight, its deep, resonant toll cutting through the silence like a knife. As the final chime echoed, the shadow's voice filled the room, a low, guttural whisper that sounded like the wind dragging over broken glass. "You should have stayed quiet." The light went out. Emma screamed. When the light returned, the room was empty. The poker lay on the floor, bent and broken. The front door stood ajar, swinging gently in the wind. But Emma was gone. Outside, in the forest, the shadow lingered, watching the cabin. And in the faint glow of the moonlight that had finally pierced the clouds, two pale hands reached out from the darkness of the trees, dragging something or someone deeper into the night. And then silence. The cabin stood still, as though nothing had happened, but the shadow under the window remained, waiting for its next visitor. The storm rolled in swiftly, dark clouds consuming the moonlight as thunder growled in the distance. Caroline sat alone in her parents' old countryside house, flipping through an ancient photo album by the dim light of a single candle. The house creaked and groaned with the shifting wind, its age evident in every shutter of the wooden frame. Rain began to hammer against the windows, a relentless rhythm that drowned out all other sound. Caroline didn't mind the isolation, it was almost comforting. She enjoyed the quiet, the solitude of being far from the city. But as she turned the page of the album, her hand froze. The photograph before her was wrong. It showed her sitting on the very couch she occupied, holding the album. But the photograph had captured her from behind, as though someone had been standing just over her shoulder. She whipped around, her heart thundering, but there was no one there. Only the empty room, cast in flickering shadows from the candlelight. Caroline laughed nervously, shaking her head. "Old tricks of the mind," she muttered, closing the album and setting it aside. She chalked it up to fatigue. After all, the house had been abandoned for years, and her parents had only recently asked her to check on it. She stretched, glancing at the clock on the wall. Midnight, perfect time to call it a night. But just as she began to extinguish the candle, a sound froze her in place. Thud, 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 the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoed from above. Her eyes shot to the ceiling, the roof. The footsteps were slow, purposeful, as though whoever or whatever was up there wanted her to know they were there. Could it be the wind? She whispered to herself, though even she didn't believe it. The footsteps were too precise, too human. Clutching the candle holder like a lifeline, she moved toward the front door. The plan was simple. Step outside and look up, prove to herself it was nothing. Yet as her trembling hand gripped the doorknob, another sound stopped her cold. Scrape, the sound of nails or claws dragging across the shingles. The steps began again, this time faster, moving from one side of the roof to the other. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone up there?" The storm swallowed her voice, but the footsteps paused, as though whoever was on the roof had heard her. She held her breath. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a flash of lightning, something slammed against the window. She screamed, dropping the candle holder. The light extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. Her pulse raced as she stumbled backward, her eyes straining to adjust to the sudden blackness. The rain lashed harder against the glass, but she swore she could see the faint outline of a hand pressed against the window. A hand too long, with too many fingers. The footsteps resumed, now frantic, thundering across the roof like a predator circling its prey. She scrambled for her phone, only to realize it was upstairs in the bedroom. Upstairs, where the attic door led to the roof. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. But something else, something primal, urged her to confront it. With trembling hands, she grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and crept toward the staircase. Each step felt like a betrayal, the old wood groaning beneath her weight. As she reached the top, the attic door swung open with a deafening bang. Caroline froze, the beam of her flashlight trembling as it pointed into the dark void of the attic. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. No answer, but then tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the far corner of the attic. The flashlight flickered as she stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, something sharp. Her beam landed on the source of the sound, a trapdoor leading to the roof. It was open, swinging gently in the wind. She edged closer, every nerve in her body screaming for her to stop. The rain was deafening now, the storm's fury unmatched. As she reached the trapdoor, the footsteps stopped. Her heart pounded in the silence. She aimed the flashlight out onto the roof, the beam slicing through the rain. It illuminated the shingles, slick and glistening, but there was nothing there. She let out a shaky breath, laughing at her paranoia. "It's just the storm," she whispered. But then she heard it behind her. Thud. She turned, and the flashlight caught the figure at the edge of the attic. It stood impossibly tall, its limbs stretched too far, its head cocked unnaturally to one side. Its face was pale and featureless, except for a single gaping mouth. Before she could scream, it lunged at her with an inhuman speed, and everything went black. When she awoke, the storm had passed. The house was eerily quiet, the first light of dawn filtering through the broken window. She was lying on the roof, her head pounding, her clothes soaked from the rain. As she sat up, she realized she wasn't alone. Scattered across the shingles were dozens of muddy footprints, each one leading to the open trapdoor. And beside her, carved into the wood, were the words, "You're next." The small, suburban house was bathed in a warm glow as Sarah prepared for her quiet evening. Rain drummed softly against the windows, and a steaming cup of tea sat untouched on the coffee table beside her. She was engrossed in her latest true crime documentary, the narrator's voice filling the room with tales of eerie disappearances and unresolved mysteries. Outside, the storm intensified, thunder rolling like a distant growl, and flashes of lightning illuminated the darkened neighborhood. Sarah pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. Not from the storm, but from the haunting story unfolding on her screen. And then it happened. The lights went out. The television screen blinked off, plunging the room into pitch-black silence. Sarah sat frozen for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. The only sound was the steady patter of rain and the low rumble of thunder in the distance. "Great," she muttered, fumbling for her phone. The screen glowed faintly, casting ghostly shadows on the walls. She swiped at the flashlight app, the beam cutting through the darkness and revealing the familiar contours of her living room. Sarah rose from the couch, her footsteps muffled by the carpet as she made her way to the breaker box in the basement. The house felt unnervingly still, each creak of the wooden floorboards amplified in the oppressive silence. As she descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the beam of her flashlight wavered. The basement had always unnerved her, with its low ceilings and the faint smell of damp concrete. But tonight it felt different, heavier somehow. She reached the breaker box and opened it, the metallic clang echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Her fingers trembled as she flipped the switches, but nothing happened. The power remained stubbornly off. A faint noise made her freeze. Tap, tap, tap. It came from somewhere behind her, a rhythmic sound that sent shivers racing down her spine. Slowly, she turned, the flashlight beam sweeping across the basement. The boxes of old junk, the rusty tools, the furnace. All of it cast long, eerie shadows. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. No response. She swallowed hard and took a step back toward the stairs. As her foot landed on the first step, the noise came again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. The beam of her flashlight caught movement. A flicker, a shadow darting just out of view. "Is someone there?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Silence. Then, with a sudden and deafening crash, the basement door slammed shut. Sarah screamed, bolting up the stairs two at a time, her flashlight shaking wildly. She twisted the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Panic clawed at her throat as she pounded on the door. "Let me out!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the confined stairwell. Behind her, the noise changed. No longer a tap, it was now a scrape. A slow, deliberate dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. Sarah's stomach dropped as the sound drew closer. Her flashlight flickered, the beam dimming and then going out entirely. She fumbled with the phone, smacking it against her palm, but the screen stayed dark. She was plunged into total blackness. The scraping stopped. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her ears straining to catch any sound. And then, from the bottom of the stairs, she heard it. A whisper, low, guttural, and incomprehensible, like a voice not meant for human ears. "Who's there?" she choked out, her voice trembling. The whisper stopped. Something brushed against her leg. Sarah screamed, twisting around in the dark, her hands flailing. She lost her balance and tumbled down the stairs, landing hard on the cold concrete. Pain shot through her ankle and she cried out, her vision swimming. And then she felt it. A hand, ice cold and bony, gripping her arm. "No!" she shrieked, kicking and thrashing. The grip was impossibly strong, dragging her backward across the floor. She clawed at the concrete, her nails breaking as she fought against whatever was pulling her. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second, and she saw it. The thing was humanoid, but its features were wrong. Its limbs too long, its face stretched into a grotesque grin that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its empty eyes bored into hers, and in that brief flash, she saw her reflection in their void-like depths. The darkness returned, and the grip tightened. Sarah's screams echoed through the house, but outside, the storm drowned out the sound. When the power finally came back on, the house was empty. The basement door hung ajar, swaying gently in the breeze from an open window. And on the living room floor, where Sarah had been sitting, her phone lay glowing. Its screen displayed a single, chilling message. "I like it better when the lights are off."